Hi besties! My name is Angie, this is my channel, Maybe I'll Read Today, and today I'm begging for a win. I haven't had a 5-star read in like a month, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it feels like a big deal because everything that I've read has been a 2 or 3 star, or even worse, a nothing star, just a book that I spent time on. So I'm here quite literally on my knees begging to the book gods, to the universe at large, to just give me a 5-star read. I don't exactly know how this vlog is going to be formatted because yes, this is a vlog. I have a collection of books that I think are going to be 5 stars. I don't know if we're going to read all of them. I don't know if this is going to be like one of those this vlog ends when I get a 5-star read, mostly because I'm scared of committing to that, because what if none of these books are 5 stars and then this vlog never ends and I'm just lost in the void. So like I'm not ready to commit to that yet, but I have 6 books that I think are going to be 5-star reads. We are going to read them. It's going to be great. And hopefully I can get myself out of this slump, because this slump is getting slumpier and slumpier by the day and I can't deal with it anymore. The first book that is hopefully gonna change some things is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. This is admittedly not a book that I would go for on my own. When I was first introduced to this book, I did not care much for it. However, I'm willing to give it a shot, because it's supposed to be a romance, it's supposed to be a fantasy, a romantasy, if you will, which actually worries me because I don't really like that genre, but the romance part will probably do me some good. It follows a young professor who studies fairies, and she goes to this small village to seek out some fairies so that she can add them to her encyclopedia. And also there's like a guy who's like her rival who also shows up at the same place, and so they're kind of like competing to get the information first, but also there's like some tension going on between them, and so it's supposed to be like really fun and bantery, but also like really whimsical and cool. And again, it's not a book that I would typically go for, but I do know that Kayla from Books and Lala really likes the series, and we have overlapping taste for a lot of things. So I feel like if she's into this and she has high praises for this, I'm willing to give it a shot. I think this is a good starting point, and then we can work our way up to like the more solid 5-star reads that I have in front of me. And so that's the plan. Hopefully it works, and hopefully I can learn to love to read again. And wouldn't that be something? Wouldn't that be wonderful? I don't have a lot to update you on because I'm only 26 pages into Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fantasy. While I'm not very far, I am already pretty delighted. We've been introduced to Emily and she's on this trip to do like research on fairies and what have you. It's in this really small, like isolated village, and she is by herself in a cabin, and we've really just been following her as she's been settling in. She's very much not a camping girly, so things have been pretty rough in that aspect. Like she didn't know how to start a fire, she didn't know how to get water, she didn't know how to do a lot of things. The village kind of looks down on her a little bit at the moment. Like not only is she an outsider, but she's an outsider who can't do shit. And so that's problematic. And you know what? If I was a villager, I too would kind of look down on her for that too. Like, you come into my home and you act like an idiot? Come on now. As part of like the introduction, we get a lot of like little footnotes about like fairy lore, which I think is really delightful and fun. It makes it so that you're reading like her travel log, and it's just part of the world building that's been really delightful and really fun so far. And we've also been introduced to her rival, who is named Wendell Bambleby. He is a guy who also works at Cambridge. He's like the #1 fairy professor. They have something of like a friendship-hate relationship because they're in the same field, because they do a lot of similar work. They obviously have to work with each other a lot, and so there is some kind of like camaraderie within that realm because they have the same interests, they have the same passions, they're doing the same work. However, Emily is still not super fond of the guy because she describes him as her only friend, but when she receives a letter from him, she's kind of like annoyed at the fact that he even wrote at all. It's kind of like a misplaced anger, a misplaced hate, because like she obviously feels like strong emotions towards him, but she doesn't know how to identify those strong emotions, so she's just like pushing it off as hate and annoyance, which I think is going to be really delightful once they're like in the same place together. But there is an added layer of like foolishness going on, because on top of just finding him mildly annoying, Emily also has this like internal conspiracy that Bamblebee is actually a fairy in secret. I don't really know how to explain like the significance of that in this story, and I also don't really know how to explain how delighted I was when I read that. But there's something about like rivals to lovers and like one person trying to prove that the other person is supernatural that is just like really silly to me. And so either this man is a fairy, or Emily is so lost in the sauce that she's just gonna go out of her way to try and prove that this very normal, albeit weird man is a fairy. And I don't know which one of the outcomes delights me more, because I think both are very funny. So it's safe to say I'm enjoying this. However, it has only been 25 pages, so I don't want to like raise my expectations like stupid high too soon, but I'm having a good time. And yet I can't focus on this book because I am so tired, and I don't even understand why I'm tired today, but I cannot stop yawning. And as soon as I sit on my couch, like everything in my brain is just like screaming for me to take a nap, which I can't do because I'm working, but I want to very badly. And that's kind of what I'm dealing with today. And I'm trying to be really strong about it. Sorry if the audio is a little janky. I'm warming up my car and she's old, so she makes some noises sometimes. I got about 50 pages into Emily Wilde last night, and I'm happy to say I'm still delighted, if not more delighted than before. Because earlier, Emily was just complaining about Professor Bamblebee, and now he's here. But okay, before that, I'm starting to suspect two things. One, Bamblebee is definitely a fairy, but also I think the town that she's currently in is inhabited entirely by fairies, right? Because apparently there are two types of fairy types. There's the small little guys, and then there's like the courtly fairies who like appear more human. And I don't know a lot about fairy lore, but the one thing I do know is that they take things very literally. So when Emily went to the pub, they were giving her special treatment and giving her like free meals and whatever, and she says, no, just treat me like any other foreigner. And then as soon as she said that, like everyone's vibe totally switched. They're rude to her, they're charging her like foreigner fees, which are like 10 times more than the average fee for like basic goods. They're talking shit. They're just like generally not welcoming anymore. And so I feel like that's such a fairy thing, to take this like super modest statement of like, don't treat me any differently, and then like really going to town with it. Everyone's treating her like shit. She's having the worst time. And when she's like truly hit rock bottom, there's a knock on her door, and it's Bamblebee. And he was basically like, hey, I was thinking about it. I think your project is really cool and I want in. And she was basically like, no. And their dynamic is so fun because they are so at odds with each other. It reminds me so much of Sophie and Hal from Howl's Moving Castle. So that's who I'm headcanoning for both of them. That's the fan cast is animated. This is an animated feature in my brain. Shout out to Miyazaki because he pulled this all together. I'm on my way to work. Clearly. Unfortunately, I don't have the audiobook, so I won't be able to read it until I get home later tonight. But before that, depending on the weather and depending on when I get out of work, we might be making a stop at the bookstore because I have to pick up some stuff. Did I buy more books? Maybe. My library didn't have these books, so I had to figure it out. But I am having a good time. I'm like actually super freaking delighted so far, so that's good news. Things are looking up, at least. It's been several days since my last update, and since my last update, I still haven't had the chance to pick up the books that I need to pick up. Every single time I have the intention of going to that bookstore after work, by the time I get there, they're already closed. Despite the fact that Google says they close at 7, They actually close whenever they want in the afternoon. And I kind of respect that. Like, they literally have a sign on their door that's like open at 10, closes sometime in the afternoon. I wish I had a job like that. And speaking of which, the vibes, the energy at my job recently have been so foul that like by the time I get out, I either don't even have the energy to bother checking the bookstore, or when I do, it's closed. And then by the time I get home, I can't do anything more than just like eat, shower, and then lay in bed. So things have been going super well for me lately. The only benefit is that because I don't have the energy to do anything but lay in bed, I have been getting a lot of reading done. So, I mean, there's pros and cons to everything, right? I'm currently on page 162, and despite everything else in the world feeling so atrocious, this book is delightful. I wanted to avoid major spoilers when talking about this book because I know it's like still semi-popular, but there's just no way of talking about the entire book without talking around this like major spoiler. So we're just gonna, I mean, I always do spoilers in my vlogs anyway, so I don't know why I tried to be different. Very quickly, we learned that Emily's hypothesis about Bamblebee is correct. He is a fairy prince. He was exiled by his stepmom. There was a whole drama. All of his brothers were killed. By fairy law, like, you have to leave one of them alive because like fairy law is dependent on loopholes and a good story. And it's a good story to keep one of them alive to later avenge the rest of the family. So he's that guy, which is a big burden to put on anybody. But we find out that Bamblebee gets into like fairy academia because he's trying to find the secret door to like re-enter his kingdom unnoticed so that he can kill his stepmom. But that was really exciting. I love that Emily was right. And I love that I was right because I believed in Emily and I support women, especially women in STEM. The reason why that's really important is because once she reveals that she knows, she gets like really excited about doing like tests on like fairy stuff with him, and he kind of indulges her a little bit, and it was just like so silly and so delightful. Like, I literally was kicking my feet when that happened because like they're always so at odds with each other, and now that they have this understanding and this shared secret, they're like hanging out and they're like playing with each other, like, for lack of better words. And it's just like they're getting lost in their passions with one another. It's like very like, okay, this is very different. This is a very different vibe. This is a very different genre, but it's very much like in Twisters, the movie starring Daisy Edgar Jones and Glenn Powell. They hate each other in the beginning, and then once they realize that they have the shared passion and they're like doing tests and like hanging out in the barn and like having the time of their life, like it's like that level of chemistry and like fun and joy that I'm like, oh my God, that's what joy feels like. I forgot. Like, this is amazing. I want more of this. So there's that. But as far as like actual plot stuff, two girls have been taken by fairies, and so these villagers were really panicked and they're really scared, rightfully so. They asked Emily and Bamblebee to go into the woods and try to find these girls, especially because Bamblebee is a fairy himself. They're like, please, like, you might have some kind of influence, or something that you can exchange in order to bring these girls back safely. Because it's very normal for fairies to take a person every once in a while, but it's very not normal for them to do it so consistently and so often. Because in this village, in the past 5 years, like 6 people have been disappeared, and it's usually like one person every 10 years. So like it sucks, but it's like, damn, that's crazy. And then we move on. And it might have something to do with the fact that there's like this evil fairy king that's currently buried into the woods. Like, this was mentioned very briefly, but it seems like it's going to be a larger part of the plot. There's basically this weird tree in the middle of the woods. The tree almost ate Bamblebee because, according to Bamblebee, the spirit of the king wanted his body so that he can escape the tree. So that's a thing. And Emily, when she was investigating the tree, she touched one of the leaves, which was bad, because if you touch a fairy leaf, you can get like fairy magic in your brain. And so there's like moments where she kind of like dips out and disassociates, and that's when like the fairy magic is taking over. And she has this like weird ring that's appearing on her finger, and she's hiding that from Bamblebee because she doesn't want to admit that he's right, because he told her, hey, don't touch that tree, and she said, I'm a scientist, I'm gonna touch that tree. And so now these are the consequences of touching that tree. That's really convoluted and weird, and it makes sense in the context of the book. Don't know if it makes sense when I'm saying it out loud, but like when I'm reading it, it makes sense. And I'm having a good time. And above all, the most exciting thing is I want to read. Like, I get home from work feeling like shit, and then I'm like, wait a minute, I can read this and feel good again. So that's a really good feeling. That's a feeling that I haven't had for a while with reading. And again, I don't know if this is an effect of like all of the shitty things in reality that my like desire for escapism is growing a little bit stronger, or if it's just this book is good. And you know what? It could be both things. I forgot to bring my actual camera with me as I go about my day, as I go about my errands. So we are recording this on my phone. Sorry if the quality is slightly worse, but I am happy to say I finished Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. Absolutely delightful. I think I might be into cozy mysteries because what I liked about this book is that it didn't really get super deep into the quest, into the like magic of it all. Because it's written in a way that it is Emily's travel log and her notes from this like research trip, when they get into a conflict, when they get into a mystery, she kind of like wraps it up really quickly. She's like, this thing happened and it was fucked up and then we fixed it, and like don't even think about it anymore. And like, that's what I liked. I also just really loved Bamblebee's and Emily's whole vibe. Like, it's so very much like Howl and Sophie, Glenn Powell and Daisy Edgar Jones in Twisters. And especially because in all of those scenarios, the male lead has been like secretly pining over the female lead the entire time. The guy is like head over heels, like a doofus, right? Which 10 out of 10, cannot recommend enough. And in the case of this book, when Bamblebee finally confesses to Emily, he goes about it in a way that like she will understand and she will get the significance of this confession, that she'll take him seriously because he's a fairy, she's mortal. And the one way you can have complete control over a fairy is if you know their true name. It's like very Catholic demon rules. And so when he first confesses, she's like, you're joking, you're joshing, you're just being a goofball. And he's like, no, like, I'll ask me right now for my true name. I'll give it to you, no hesitation. And she was like, whoa. Like, he knows how to say things and do things so that it makes sense to her. And I think that's really sweet. And I'm talking a lot about them, but like there's like very little romance in this too. Like, if you're expecting like fairy smut, this is not the book for you. The most they've done is like hold each other's hands, and he like kissed her hand at one point. But like, I'm a Bridgerton girly, I'm a Pride and Prejudice girly, and above all, I'm a Capricorn Venus. So I love the slow burn and I love the yearning of it all. Am I going to the library today to pick up the rest of the series? Yes. Is this becoming an Emily Wilde vlog? No, because as much as I enjoy this, it still wasn't a 5-star. There was a lot I loved, and yet there's a lot that could still be improved. A lot of this book was understanding these characters, and now that we know them, we can just like jump into the shenanigans in book 2 or 3. So all that to say is I gave this book 4 stars, which is not a 5, and so we are still on the quest for a 5-star read. I haven't started any books yet, but I am thinking about these 2, and I don't know which one to pick. So I actually posed it to my Instagram. I'm going to check back on that Instagram poll later today and just see what the people have decided for me. Hey friends, I am reading books, or more specifically a book. It's been a couple of days since I put up that Instagram poll, and I have been reading, just I didn't have the time or energy to be on camera. But basically, that Instagram poll, super close, neck to neck for the majority of the day. But when I finally checked at the end of the day, I Who Have Never Known Men was the clear winner. And so that's what we've been reading. I'm about 77 pages in, and I just feel like one giant question mark. It's just, just Yeah, we're following our protagonist. She is a young woman who has been imprisoned with 39 other women her entire life. The other 39 women have vague memories of what life was like before, but our protagonist does not know what the outside world is like. In the first third of the book, we're following our protagonist as she is starting to question things, which is kind of huge just because like they've been in here for so long. All of the other women have become kind of numb to their situation. It's just like, we're just surviving day by day. We're just doing what we can. Who cares, right? But our protagonist starts to wonder why. What is the meaning of all of this? And because she starts questioning it and she starts posing these questions to these other women, I don't want to say it's almost as if they woke up, but it's almost as if they woke up, you know, like they're like, oh yeah, like, why are we doing this? And the young girl starts using her heartbeat to measure time, and she realizes that like they're not living the full 24 hours of a day, they're living like half that. And so they're slowly putting together these like weird pieces of what everything is. But because we're following a protagonist who doesn't have all the answers, we also don't have all of the answers, which feels a little frustrating, but also feels very immersive. And at this point, I don't even know if I want the answers. Like, I don't think any answer that Jacqueline Hartman can provide would satisfy the bizarreness of what's going on. And then one day, the guards are coming over to drop off food, as they do, and the siren goes off. And the guards basically just drop everything and run. And one of the things that they drop is the key to the cage that the women are staying in. So our protagonist grabs the key, unlocks the door, and now all of the women are free. And when they leave the cage, they find out that the cage is actually underground in a small cabin in the middle of nowhere. So where I'm at now, the women are free. They have since returned to the prison to like gather supplies. And they're kind of trying to figure out next steps because, again, it is in the middle of nowhere. There are no roads. And they're not even sure if they want to follow roads if they find some, because they don't know where they are. They don't know the country, the world, the town. And like, it could very well be likely that if they find a town, the town is in collaboration with these guards and they would just capture them and put them back in prison. So it's like, it's a really big question mark of a book. The one thing I will say is I'm surprised that this hasn't made its rounds sooner in mainstream media. I was reading the blurb the other day, and it almost seems like this book was like lost in time because it says back in print for the first time since 1997. I'm assuming it didn't really make its rounds in 1997 because I feel like this has really gained popularity in the last year or so. So like, imagine being published in the 19X and it only having its real moment like 20 years later, 30 years later. Oh fuck, it's 30 years later. While reading this book, I can't help but think of like The Handmaid's Tale and like that little short story about the Nasarima, where it's like these stories are presented as big question marks, as big mysteries. And then by the time you get to the end of it, you find out that Nasarima backwards is just American and that The Handmaid's Tale is just a depiction of like modern, I don't know if it takes place in the US or in Canada, I'm not sure. And I'm trying to like figure out if this is gonna do something similar. And if so, who, what, where, and why? I haven't gotten that far yet, obviously, so. Hi friends, I have a little bit of a cold going on. I woke up super congested, but I wanna make this update now so that I can go back to bed and read and do my thing. So if this update is a little loosey-goosey, I just took some Dayquil. I finished I Who Have Never Known Men a few days ago. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars, so this is not the end of the vlog. I've made the decision that this vlog is not gonna end until I get a 5-star, which is a really big promise to make, but that just feels satisfactory to me. Like, we've gotten so close, but I want to end on that note. And the reason why this wasn't a full 5-star for me is because I just felt a little disconnected from the story. In part, I understand why that choice was made. We're following a narrator who was not raised in a super nurturing environment. She doesn't have a close bond with people. And as she gets older, she becomes more and more isolated. So there's no reason for her to like flex that emotional part of her being. But the second half of the book just felt really like stoic and felt really like disjointed from everything else. So I don't know if we talked about this already. I don't know where we're at, but basically these women have escaped the prison, and as a group, They are kind of roaming this planet, this country, this world, trying to find another life form. And over time, they realize this is not going to happen. So they kind of settle down. They create their own village, and over time, everyone is aging. Some older women get sick. They start to die off one by one, and eventually we are left with just our narrator. And when she is alone again, she takes it upon herself to continue this journey. And there are different points in the story where she sees something different. She sees a new building, she sees a bus, there's like a potential for like a connection, and it always ends in disappointment. Again, for that reason, I understand why she becomes more distant and more cold and more isolated, because she quite literally has no one to share these feelings with. And a lot of the book is kind of disjointed in that way because of the personality of our narrator. It's more of a summary of events rather than like an immersive storytelling moment. And in some ways, again, it works. In some other ways, I lost interest. But by the end of it, I still really enjoyed this book. I feel like it has a lot to say about exactly and the lengths that people will go to like maintain their humanity in moments of devastation. And I think it really speaks to us as a society, which I think is why sci-fi dystopian shit is so interesting all the time, because like it's not really dystopian, it's not really far-fetched, it's our reality just in a different setting. And what I really liked about it is that by the end of it, our protagonist is in this bunker that she found, and she's writing this story. She's like, there's a part of me that fears that no one is going to see this and it doesn't matter, but if I don't try, then my story will be lost forever. And so like it's kind of this beautiful like circular moment where it's like you realize that by reading this story, you're keeping her story alive and you're like contributing to her memory. And I think that's really beautiful. Moving on to our next book. This was not on the roster, but I just can't stop thinking about it. I started Room to Dream by David Lynch and Christine McKenna the other day. This is the biography memoir of David Lynch. RIP to that big guy. And it's been so interesting. Just like the layout itself of this memoir feels very David Lynch in the way that it can't just be a straightforward memoir. It has to be a little different. It has to be a little surreal. So each chapter is actually broken into two different parts. The first part is written by Christine McKenna, and this is the standard biography. This is the laying down of the facts. This is the quotes from interviews. This is like David Lynch's life. And then each section, and in that chapter is followed by a chapter by David Lynch, where he's kind of responding to that chapter. And he's kind of making connections and making corrections as he goes along. So the introduction described this as not being a biography, but rather witnessing a person having a conversation with his own biography. That's the perfect way to describe this. And it's just like such a cool way to tackle your biography. It's also really interesting to see David Lynch's trains of thoughts and how he makes connections, because in one chapter about his childhood, the like biography part is talking about like his friend group and how they influenced him and what they did. And then in David Lynch's chapter, he's like, yeah, the first time I jerked off, I was 12. It was crazy. White stuff was coming out of everywhere. And it's just like, wait, David, we were just talking about baseball 2 seconds ago. What the fuck? It feels very real. And like, obviously, I don't know David Lynch. I didn't know him. And I'm not trying to have a parasocial relationship with him, but like of the little things that I've known of him through his art and through his interviews, this feels very him. That's been really fun. It's been so enjoyable to read this book. So that's the update. I don't know if you can hear. My cat has been crying this whole time. She just is annoying. I don't know. I don't know what she wants. And honestly, my brain hurts too much to try and figure it out. And so I think I'm just gonna check on her, and then I'm just gonna put on some headphones because I don't care. Hi friends. Hello Egghead. I'm the Egghead, not you. You look beautiful. I am about 200-ish pages into the David Lynch memoir biography. I don't want to say this too soon, but like I think this is it. I am enjoying this so much. I'm so fascinated by this guy's whole vibe. Oh wait, no. Oh no, my neighbor is coming out of the building and they're parked right beside me, and I don't want to do this, and I don't want them to see me do this. to risk sounding super parasocial about David Lynch, a man I never knew, and a man I never met, a man who I've only seen a handful of movies very recently, he is just such a fascinating guy, and so much of the like biography chapters talk about how he was so charming and people were just like immediately endeared by him, and it sounds almost fake, but then you read the David Lynch chapters and it's just so obvious why. The way he speaks about other people, there's like so much love and so much care to even like the most random person. He'll be telling a story about like how he used to go to a diner every day and there is just like this random waiter who was always there, and he would just be like, that's Jim. Jim is such a great guy. Like, yeah, he tried to beat me up one time, but he's just misunderstood. He's really funny. I still consider him a friend. It's kind of amazing to read about a real life person who was just like so open and so caring and so optimistic about life and everyone they've met and everything that has ever happened to them, because even when he's recalling some of his like fumbles in his career, like the premiere of Eraserhead, like nobody showed up, and he was like, for any other director that wouldn't be a success, but for me the success came from making my art exactly how I wanted to make it, being able to finish it, and actually putting it out there in the world. Not only is this guy super open to people in life and events, but he also just like really loves his art. And it's a strength and a weakness because it clearly affects his marriages and his like intimate relationships, because he gets so involved with his art, everything else just kind of falls by the wayside. But I'm only 200 pages in and it's like a 500 something page book, but like I don't think he ever like cheated on his wives, unless the movie he's working on counts as like the other woman. I'll eat my words later if he does say that he cheated on somebody. So far it just appears to be a guy who just passionately loves what he does, and I think that's incredible. And I think that's another reason why people were so immediately charmed by him, because like you can just tell that this is it for him, and he doesn't really care what capacity it is as long as he can be involved in it. And honestly, I'm not surprised that this is hitting so much for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier, but also because even prior to making this vlog, I did text one of my friends and I said, hey, I think I'm in my nonfiction era. Like, I think I'm getting into biographies more, because very recently they recommended Annie Ernaux. I haven't started it yet, but I did recently purchase it. And that same day I came across a Patti Smith memoir at a little free library, and it just felt like a moment where I was like, I'm gonna get into biography memoirs. Like, this is the moment. And then I kind of ignored it because I wanted to read the books that we were reading together. And I think this is the universe telling me, no, this is the moment. This is the biography memoir moment. Like, don't shy away from it. Like, this is what's happening. The real reason why I wanted to make an update today is because I'm Boo Boo the Fool. Because yesterday, while we were in the car together, I said something silly like, hey, at least he never cheated on his wife. And the sweet irony of that is that when I was at work, I decided to read a little bit, and I kid you not, 2 pages later, he cheated on his wife. So I guess I'm coming on camera to say, I'm a fool. Shame on me for giving a man more credit than is due, because at the end of the day, a man is still a man. No matter how spiritual, artistic, and intellectual he is still a man. And some would argue an artsy, spiritual, emotionally vulnerable man is probably the worst kind of man, because he's gonna find love no matter where he goes. And that's exactly what appears to be happening with David Lynch. I think it was his daughter who said something along the lines of, when David Lynch loves you, he loves you. You are in his orbit. He makes you feel so seen. He cares about you. And it's like one of the best feelings in the world. But when he finds something else to focus on, it is like the most devastating loss to feel. And I can totally see where she's coming from, just like reading his chapters, not only talking about the people in his life, but when projects come up and when projects no longer interest him, it's like black and white, the way that he's so invested and then he wants nothing to do with anything. It speaks to his artisticness, and it speaks to the tensions that come with it. this is it. I told you this vlog would end when I got a 5-star. And we got a 5-star, baby. But before we start talking about this book, I do want to talk about my little David Lynch weekend first, because I think I mentioned in a previous update that over the weekend, my local theater was doing a little event in honor of David Lynch, and they were screening Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart. And not only were they screening these movies, but Frederick Elms, who is the director of photography, was also there. He did a little Q&A in between the movies, and that in itself is really cool. But more so, the copy of Wild at Heart that we were watching was actually Frederick Elm's personal copy. The other really lovely thing about this experience was just the fact that everyone in that room loved David Lynch. And not only just loved David Lynch, but like loved movies. And you could feel it in the room. And it just like, it felt so good. It felt so warm. And did I get a little teary during the Q&A when Frederick Elms kept referring to David Lynch in the present tense? Yes. I can also tell you that by reading this book beforehand, it allowed me to have a greater appreciation for these movies. And it allowed me to have a little bit more context. And I don't mean context in like the plot or in the storyline, but just in the making of the movies. Like, this book talks a lot about David Lynch's, not obsession, high value of shadows and lighting in a movie. And so by reading this book beforehand, it allowed me to really pay attention to that in the movie. And I know that a lot of people have like a lot of hesitation about giving biographies and memoirs 5 stars. And usually I do too, but like, this was just so good. How could I not? Not only is it just a subject matter that I care deeply about, and I don't just mean like David Lynch, because I don't know that man, but just the overarching subject of filmmaking and art and passions. And like I said before, I also really loved how this was told. The way that David Lynch was reacting to the biography part of the book was really cool. And again, I think should be the norm. If possible, I think we should do this in all biographies. And I also just really liked learning about David Lynch as a person, as a human being. Through this book, I learned that he was not only a filmmaker, like he was an artist through and through. In between films, he was painting and sculpting and making furniture and making music. Every single time he had an idea, every single time he had a passion project, he would like invest in making his own studio in his own backyard so that whenever something came to mind, he could just walk across the yard and get to work. Which I think speaks to, one, his resources. Also speaks to his passion and his determination and his creativity. And I feel like if I just had an ounce of his passion, of his creativity, of his optimism, of his love for the world, I'd be doing so good. And I feel like this book inspired me to be a little bit more intentional with my time and what I do and how I do it and who I do it with. And I think it scratched a part of my brain that I didn't know needed to be scratched, but now that it has been scratched, there is no way to unscratch it. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. I feel like I've had something of a revelation. I'm just like trying to piece it out and figure out what it exactly means for me. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.